Hello students, Namaste, welcome to Career 360. You can be the topper of your class, topper of your school, but still you may not be allowed to pursue undergrad program because your topper of a school doesn't matter anymore. There seems to be a conspiracy to ensure that everything that happens in schooling education is completely demonetized because everything that you want to do, everything you want to study further is now dependent not on how you perform at the schools, but how you perform in an entrance examination. It doesn't matter that through the year you would have taken unit tests, quarterly tests, half-yearly tests and scored very, very well. And through each of them there is a weightage when you ultimately get your CGPA. But what matters is how you perform in the 3-hour examination that happens in something beyond your school. Your school ranks no longer matter. If you're a student studying in Delhi, you can be the state topper, but you cannot pursue undergrad program unless and until you crack an examination called CUET. You can be the state topper again, as I'm saying. It doesn't matter anymore. Entrance examinations seem to be taking over everything that we do, and to that extent, the schooling education that you perform and you deliver and you really work hard no longer matters. And this seems to be extremely unfair for those people who are studying in government schools especially, or state board schools, because the data suggests that if you do not have access to coaching, if you don't have affordability of coaching, then you're least likely to pursue a good program in a good college for your higher education. Let me explain to you through data information of what exactly is happening. Recently, the National Commission for Allied and Healthcare Professionals has come up with a regulation. You must know that NEET as an examination was earlier meant to be deciding for people who wanted to get into MBBS. But increasingly, it is crawling slowly and steadily into everything to do with PCB students. Even if you want to pursue a BSc program or a nursing program, NEET is being made mandatory. So it's no longer about MBBS alone now. Now we're talking coming down the ladder in terms of any undergrad program which a life sciences student would want to do, or a allied sciences or a paramedical student wants to do. All these programs are making NEET a mandatory score for you to even pursue a program. Of course, the basic eligibility of being a class 12 pass out is there, but that is where it remains. You can just be a pass out, be a state topper, but still if you don't crack this particular examination, it doesn't matter how you performed in your school education. Look at the directive of the NCAHP. It says, I'm directed to say that the National Commission for Allied and Healthcare Professionals has notified 13 curricula so far for different courses of allied and healthcare professionals for graduate and postgraduate levels, which are to be implemented from the year 26-27 academic year. Also to be noted that NCHP is in the process of releasing more curricula, which essentially means for about 13 courses that are being offered for allied science professionals, NEET becomes mandatory. Let me explain to you what exactly they're saying. It says students aspiring for admission into allied and healthcare undergrad courses after passing the senior secondary and level equivalent examination will require NEET appearance as a basic eligibility criteria, along with other eligibility criteria. What is the other eligibility criteria? Pass out of a class 12th. So what it's saying is, you passing out of class 12th is no longer the only criteria. You also need to appear for the NEET examination to make this work. Let us look at the history of NEET examination. NEET, you must also know, was implemented in sometime in 2017-18 because of a Supreme Court order. And since 2019, NTA took over. Earlier it was CBSE which was conducting the NEET examination. Now NTA took over because every medical college in this country which is offering MBBS, BDS, Ayush and veterinary science had to take the NEET as a mandatory rank and give a common counseling. At that point in time in 2019, the total number of students who were appearing for NEET examination was 14,10,000. And then slowly and steadily, other programs also started getting added to it. In 2020, AIMS and JIPMER also said that they will mandatorily take the NEET common counseling route only, which essentially means that if you want to study at AIMS or JIPMER also, you need NEET score. In 2021, the BSc Nursing also jumped into the bandwagon. So all the 8 central institutions which are offering BSc Nursing said that we will only admit students into our BSc Nursing programs if you have taken a NEET examination. So NEET became mandatory for you to now get into AIMS and JIPMER and now BSc Nursing also. And now in 2026, what are we looking at? We're looking at 13 curricula of allied and health sciences also. All these allied sciences programs, 13 of them, and this is not the end list, mind you. This is just the first part of the list. They'll keep adding more curricula And in the month of December, we are told that if you want to study BSc in 2026, which is just a few months away, you should be appearing for NEET examination. Which also means that you're pushed to actually now getting into NEET coaching, because otherwise you need to understand the basic pattern, the subjects, the qualification, how you need to appear, what kind of timing, how many questions come in. All these things need to be learned while you're preparing for your class 12th examination. You're pushing the students to a corner and compelling them and pushing them to such an extent that they will be forced to do something else besides preparing for the class 12th examination, because if they want to study further to undergrad program, NEET is mandatory and they don't know anything about NEET, because these students were not preparing for MBBS. They were preparing to clear the class 12th examination so that they can do one of the allied sciences programs. Now, where are we going here? It started with CAT, where for getting into any IIM, we actually had a CAT examination, which is common aptitude test. Then we had JEE for all the IITs, NITs, and so on and so forth. Then we had NEET for MBBS and then expanded list. We have CLAT for NLUs. We have CUET for all Delhi University and most central universities. Then you have NIT DAT and so on, so many examinations. But all these, if you see, it no longer matters what your score in class 12th examination is, because the basic entry parameter is only the common entrance examination. And that is a tragedy that we're dealing with. And why am I saying it's a tragedy? You must look at the overall picture of where India is. India has 14.71 lakh schools as of 24-25. That's the last data that we have, about close to 15 lakh schools, of which about 11 lakh schools, in fact 10.97 lakh schools are government or government aided, and 3.31 lakh, which is about 22.5% schools, are private schools. Now you look further down to CBSE, because most of these entrance examinations, because the question paper is set in Delhi, they follow the NCERT and to that extent the CBSE model. The state board schools get lost out in the middle, because these people sitting in Delhi don't even know what the state boards are teaching, what the curriculum is, what the pedagogy is, what kind of pattern of studies that they have, what kind of chapters are being taught in the state board. Because the state boards have their own curricula which is being decided by SCERT, whereas CBSE largely relies on NCERT and to that extent creates its own syllabus. Now CBSE, if you look at it, the total schools are 28,135. Of which the government and government aided schools are 6,930 and the private schools are 21,205. These are data of 20 to 23. As of now, we have about 30,493 schools, and it might be going up to 32,000 to 33,000 schools by the time we end this year also. Right? But essentially what we're talking of is CBSE schools, largely if you remove the Kendriya Vidyalayas and Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalayas, are largely private. Only the KVs and JNVs are what are public institutions. Everything else otherwise is private. Right, which also means that moment you say it's a private school, the students who can afford private coaching also is very, very large, which is not the case in state board schools. The state board schools typically are largely government schools, mind you. And to that extent, they will be more, lesser accessible to coaching or lesser affordability of coaching also. Now let's look at the overall picture only for higher education, because we are now talking of higher education and the entrance examinations. The total higher secondary schools in this country are 1,50,000 plus as of 23-24, of which the CBSE schools are 28,000, which is about 19%. Now let's look at how in a particular examination, how the CBSE students perform as compared to state board schools, and that is where my anger is, because the students are learning what is being taught to them. The students are not at fault. The students are topping for a curriculum and subject and exam that's been designed for them. But the moment it comes to an entrance examination, one board schools have a very, very unfair advantage over the other schools. And this one board school are largely private in nature. Let's look at the number, for example, for JEE examination. The last data that came out is 2018, when at that point in time, the IIT Kanpur conducted the JEE Advanced examination. Since NTA took over these examinations, the data is very scarcely available in terms of the granular details which makes us analyze how students are performing. But in the 2018 report, it gave a big expose in terms of how the students performed. In 2018, when we looked at the data, the CBSE schools students were 1,14,000 who appeared for the examination, and all the other board students were 9.28 lakh. In all, about 10.43 lakh students appeared for the examination. This year it's about 14-15 lakhs. Now this is for a total number of IIT seats of 11,961. And I repeat, it's the 2018 data, and this data will not change now. It will only expand the gap, is my perception. But because we don't have data which is current, we are talking of what is the last available data. Now the CBSE school students, who are 1,14,000 students, laid a claim on 6,600 IIT seats, which means 6,600 of the 1,14,000 students who were going through CBSE got a seat in IIT. And only 5,371 students from the state boards and all other boards added together, out of a total of 9,28,000 students, got into IITs. The success ratio for a CBSE student is for 1 in 17 students got into IIT. But for all the other boards, 1 in 173 students got into IIT. 56% of the seats that are into IITs were claimed by students who were studying in CBSE, which is only 11%. And 44% of the seats, which are students who got into IIT, were claimed by students who were studying in state board, which comprise 89% of the students. So the 89% got 44% seats, and the 11% students got 56% seats in IIT. The ratio is 173:1 for the other boards and 17:1 for the CBSE. Now, if that is not disparity, and the reason why we should be very careful about this number also is because many schools of CBSE are all private, but for the KVs and Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya, we don't have data of how many of these students are from KVs and all, because remember, Kendriya Vidyalayas and all are all over the country. Whereas CBSE students typically, they land up in one of these coaching hubs and start claiming seats, because all they do is not prepare for the CBSE examination, but only prepare for this particular thing. And that is where lies the biggest problem that we're dealing with, that seats in IIT are going to those students who can afford coaching, because they can actually, who go through coaching because they can either afford coaching or they have access to coaching. The schooling education is failing because the students are only studying school education, whereas studying any good institution at this point in time in this country requires an entrance examination, and the moment you impose an entrance examination, we're dealing with coaching. Now you look at the overall number. We also looked at NEET 2024, because if you remember NEET 2024, there was a massive scam that happened where you actually had one center claiming 7 toppers and so on and so forth. So at that point in time, Supreme Court had a hearing also happened, and because of the Supreme Court, all this data was made available for everyone out there. And that data is something that is a treasure trove for people like us who analyze this data, and we evaluated or analyze all this data at a very, very granular level at a last student. Now, the NEET 2024 was conducted across 566 cities. The total number of students were 23.33 lakh. And of these 566 cities, we also started, mapping them to the access to coaching, which means there is at least one coaching institution in that city. Only in 231 of the 566 cities had some access to coaching, which is the top 25 coaching centers. We actually mapped it back, right? And 335 of those cities do not have access to any of the coaching. Now, this 231 cities, what we talked of, where there was access to coaching, got 87% of the seats because they got a 650 plus score. And the 335 cities which did not have access to coaching had a success rate of only 14% because they did not have access to coaching. That is a very stark number. We're talking of 87% students where coaching is accessible succeeded, and only 13% students where coaching was not accessible succeeded. And that is a number that should shake all of us, because what is the mistake for a child who's born and studying in a school in a place where there is no access to coaching? You gave them a school, and you say, please study, and you can study further. But at a school education level, he passes, he tops, he succeeds and everything. But because there is no access to coaching, the student is not able to move up further and stops, and his growth or his or her career path gets stunted. And every time when I look at this data where 13.5% people only succeed when there is no access to coaching, and 87% of the students succeed because there is access to coaching, it's a bigger problem. And I'm not even getting at affordability, mind you. The 87% students where there was access to coaching, many of the students who are studying in government schools would not even go through that path because they cannot afford to pay the coaching fees. That is something which is a travesty for this country, because we are now pulling down people who cannot afford coaching, or pulling down people who are living in remote areas of this country just because they don't have access to coaching. So for me, the simple question that I would want to ask the government and every person who's a policymaker out there, what is your objective? Do you want to promote school education, or do you want to kill school education? What is the need for you to call someone a state topper when they can't even get into a good college of their own choice? What is the value that you attach to the scores that a student has in school education? What is the mistake of a child who studies what you gave as a curriculum? And it is very important for the states to understand and fight for their rights, mind you, that the student is unable to do anything with the school scores because ultimately he or she is being judged only on the entrance exam scores. What happens to those people who are studying in government schools and go back home because they can't afford coaching? What happens to those students who actually are living in remote areas of this country and do not have access to coaching? What is the conspiracy behind this? Why are we pushing our children into coaching institutions, coaching centers, and why are we killing our own school education? Is there someone out there to respond? Is there someone who has empathy? Is there someone who can answer these questions of why we are killing our own schooling education system because we want to push every student out to coaching? This is a very important question for everyone to answer, and I hope people in policy, people in education, people who are activists take up this issue of understanding why we're killing our own schooling system. Thank you. Namaste.